So to start out today's panel, which is on digital property and web3, which we've heard about already, the effect of blockchain, crypto, and NFTs on IP and value, I thought I would give a brief introduction about NFTs, what they are. That's I think, a misunderstood term. And then also briefly talk about the metaverse, which you heard a little bit about earlier from Jonathan's talk. And then we will have each panelist give a few opening remarks about their work and how NFTs factor into their own work. So NFTs, what do NFTs actually do? What does it mean? I think everybody knows that it's the short for non-fungible token. I think the easiest way to understand it, it is a new technology. It is a computer program that is often called a smart contract because it operates on blockchain to provide automated transactions and record those transactions on blockchain. Now, the part that is unique about that computer program is that there's a so-called token ID. It's a unique identifier for that token, which distinguishes it from cryptocurrency, which is fungible. Okay, so that is the basic outline of a non-fungible token. And you would think, well, that's not very interesting because what does it actually do? Well, that's often called utility. And what utility does an NFT actually have? And that is the part that we've seen so many different uses of NFTs because as a computer program, you could write the smart contract to identify something else that exists in the world. And I think the most high-profile examples of that involve artwork or cartoon characters or music, some content. And what happens is the computer program is written to identify, let's say, a stored JPEG file that is of some artwork. The NFT is the virtual token. It is not the JPEG, but the computer program is written to identify and display the JPEG image. So it's a sort of complex arrangement where you have a smart contract pointing to some other subject matter. And if that other subject matter involves copyrighted content, like artwork, the NFT producers ideally should include a content license telling the buyers of the NFTs what use rights they get to that underlying content. Now, sometimes NFT producers don't realize that that's what they should do, provide an IP license. And one of the most famous cases of this happening involved one of the most valuable NFT collections, the CryptoPunks, which were actually one of the first collections to sort of start the craze for NFTs in 2017. The two developers of the project forgot to put a content license in there, and they tried to fix that later on, 2 years later, which actually was still a little bit ambiguous in the way that they tried to fix the issue by posting a link to a content license that was used in another NFT collection. So that's how IP rights actually get involved with an NFT. There is a content license setting forth the use rights that a buyer of the NFT would get. Now, as a computer program, the program could be written to identify anything, and it could actually be used to identify intellectual property rights. So what we're seeing with NFTs, musicians are using it to give streaming royalty rights to purchasers of the NFTs, a way to fund their own music of the artists. And Blau, a famous DJ, has launched a platform called Royal, in which any musician could engage in that kind of business model to raise funds for their own music. Another example is that you could program the smart contract to associate with a patent. And I believe Erich will be talking about his platform, IPwe, in which that is one of the uses of NFTs to actually transfer the ownership rights to a patent using an NFT, which is recorded on blockchain. And there are a host of other uses, but I wanted to focus on sort of like the IP uses. So that, in a nutshell, is what an NFT is. And hopefully, I think by this discussion, you will now go back, and if you didn't have a complete understanding of what they are, that provides at least some further guidance on what we're talking about. Now, in terms of the metaverse, what are we talking about with the metaverse and Web3? My suggestion is that we think about the metaverse as a more immersive online experience, whatever that may be. It's sort of like Zoom on steroids. It is a way to engage people in a different way than what is considered to be Web 2 with social media, where there's a lot of content and it's more passive as opposed to being a part of the experience online. And you had heard about some potential pitfalls of metaverse, but I would not sort of think about Facebook or Meta as the source of the likely metaverse or metaverses you will experience in the future. Startup companies and individuals, I think, will be the source of the metaverses that will take hold. Facebook is a, frankly, Web 2 company, and they are trying to pivot to the Web 3, as many developers and companies are, because they see this as the next phase of the web, to have this more immersive experience. And just to give you an idea of why this might be useful, the Seoul city government during the pandemic used a metaverse to teach grade school children in order to engage them in online learning instead of potentially a video conference of having students participate that way. And speaking from my own personal experience, teaching Zoom to my own students for a year and a half, I can tell you there is Zoom fatigue, and there is a temptation to have for students to turn their videos off. So what ends up happening as a professor, you are teaching to a blank screen of names, right? You see no faces, they're all names. A metaverse could help change that by having avatars appear in a lecture hall like this. We could have this IPAS conference with a virtual world in which we appear through avatars and sort of engage in discussion that way. So that gives you a glimpse of how a metaverse could be used in, I think, a useful way. Okay, with that introduction, I will turn it over to, why don't I just start with Talal? If you could tell us about your work and how NFTs factor in.
Sure. Can people hear me? Is my mic on? Perfect. Thank you, Daniel. I'm Talal. I run a company I think a lot of you know. Some of you work there. Some of you are investors. Some of you have been on the receiving end of some of our business development efforts. We invented digital rights management and, more broadly, trusted distributed computing, which is a way of taking computers and making them work in a highly distributed fashion over open networks. So we put the genie back in the bottle when computers went from things you lock in a room and shoot the bad guys when they go near it, to when computers sit in your pocket, live in light bulbs, and talk over the internet. Our first market that we entered was the entertainment and media business. We were the first company in the world to work with the record business to save them from internet piracy. Back in the 90s, we created with Universal and BMG the world's first digital rights management system for music, which went on to infect the studio industry. And I'm all proud to say that when I started working in the music industry in the late 90s, it was a $45 billion industry. At the bottom, the record labels went down to about $12 billion. And last year, Universal went public for $52 billion. 100% due to the fact that they embraced digital rights management on the internet and sued the crap out of everybody building a peer-to-peer music distribution system. I hate to disagree with the fact that NFTs are new. They're not new. The implementations today on blockchains are definitely new, and the fact that the collective attention span of anyone under 40 is about 32 milliseconds means that they're new. I know we're on campus, and I'll probably be hunted down on my way home tonight. But we launched a system. It was the first digital rights management system in the 1990s that had a secure peer that could talk to other secure peers. It ran on Windows. It had a feature called super distribution, where I could write a song, email it to Efrat, she could email it to 20 of her friends. If they bought it, she got paid, I got paid. And I was explaining this to one of my younger engineers the other day. He goes, isn't that just an NFT? And I was like, yeah. And in 1999, no one wanted it. It's all going full circle. We're in a highly distributed fashion. For me, the thing that is the true epiphany about NFTs on the internet today is, for the first time since I started working in this game, the intellectual property game and the distributed trust game, consumers are buying rights. They're not buying content. And that's really deep. When you go to Netflix today, the digital rights management that Netflix conducts is simply, is this your TV? Did you pay the bill this month? Here's an encrypted stream. When you buy an NFT, you're buying the right to a piece of data, whether it's a patent license, you're entering into an intellectual property license. And for folks in this room, we do this for a living, but for Joe Sixpack in his mom's basement, buying a right that he can trade, that's a major leap forward in the way human beings relate to digital objects on the internet. I think we're at the beginning of a really intriguing episode in our career, so that's cool. One last comment before I hand the mic over to the next speaker. I think the metaverse is a pile of crap. If I was to go to an IPAS conference with everybody in this room, the last thing I'd like to see is my friend Daniel Papst appearing as Mr. Mouse and Mark Kochs coming up as Mr. Elephant. I do think there will be very specialized applications for it. I think Facebook is a failing company. Ray was at Yahoo for a long time. The sun never set on Yahoo until Yahoo fell over one day. I think Google and Apple are going to squeeze the crap out of Facebook's market, and they're desperate to find a new life. Sorry for my cynicism.
Efrat?
Hi, so I'm Efrat Kasznik. I'm the IP valuation person on the panel, so I have the formidable task of trying to value some of these. Before I forget, I also believe the metaverse is going to fail, but for a different reason. I think the hardware is just not there. So if you've been following, I've been involved with a company called Magic Leap in some litigation context, as well as looking at Oculus, and the hardware is just not there. And it's never going to be affordable in my mind. So you need like this very sophisticated set of headpiece to be able to enter the metaverse. And also it gives you, me with motion sickness, I can never put it on. If you're suffering from that, it could give you serious headaches and vertigo and things like that. So that's why I think the metaverse is never going to, put aside people's psych and things like that. I'm an IP valuation expert. I've been doing this for over 25 years, currently with my own company called Foresight Valuation Group. I'm also teaching at Stanford, as was mentioned. This is my 10th year teaching MBA students. And I also want to welcome, we have a group here of international MBAs from a school in Mexico, so welcome. And I truly believe in, just to pick on some of the talk about the board, that it's all about education and you need to start early, as Tiffany said. So in terms of the valuation, so I would, with your permission, expand my umbrella to talk about digital assets. So not just NFTs, but digital asset is something that we've been seeing in our practice, I would say, over the last decade. The first, so we value everything. We value patents, valued software, valued, everything that's in intangible, and across industries. And I would say in 2015 or 14 was the first time we got a call and somebody wanted to value a SAFT. If you know what a SAFT is, if you know what a SAFE is, okay, if you're in the startup world, you probably know what a SAFE is. It's a simple agreement for future equity. Well, there's something called SAFT in the world of, I would say, digital tokens, which is the simple agreement for future tokens. So what's happening is if you're a company that is creating a peer-to-peer network, like was our client, which is a company called Blockstack, which was a take. If you've seen Silicon Valley, the series, HBO series, that was a take on that company. And there's tokens, utility tokens, which is a kind of digital asset. The problem with the token is you hand it out to your investors, you hand it out to your employees, same way as you hand out stock options. The problem is that there's no value for that. So how do you value that, right? You need to put a value on it. It's going to have a market value when you go into an ICO, initial coin offering at some point. But when you hand these, their future. So the question is, how do you value that? So why am I telling you this story? Because I want to share a little bit of the challenges of valuation in this world. So not only is this an asset with no market, you also you dance with a bunch of regulators, which I think is kind of what ended up I think the speaker talked about the software, the Facebook currency that Libra that ended up being called Deem, that ended up dying. A lot of why it's died is because the regulators just couldn't stomach that. I know that firsthand because I know somebody who worked on that project. But going back to the valuation, so who are the regulators? The stakeholders are the IRS needs to agree to the valuation method. The SEC needs to agree to the valuation method because this company was going public eventually with that. The other regulators, the accountants. Now, you may not know that, but this is something coming down the line, which you may all, if you know anything about accounting for intangibles, just regular intangibles, you know that we have a lot of black holes in that intangibles are not on the books, are not reported, are not valued, are not measured. It turns out that the accounting system has decided to classify cryptocurrencies and digital assets as intangibles as opposed to as financial assets. So if you kind of process that in your mind for a minute, we're going to have the same problems we're having with intangibles by not being reported at market value. The same thing with this group of assets. So just, things are going to get worse from a reporting perspective. But going back to the valuation, what we ended up doing is something that is not very sexy. It's called the cost approach. If you know anything about valuation for intangibles, there's 3 approaches: cost, market, and income. Those assets, the only way you can value them, it's really a piece of software, like you're saying. Using cost approach, this is the one methodology that all the constituents, all the regulators manage to agree on. And things are coming up, and in my mind, I see there are 3 challenges here. One is the business model challenge. So how do you make money of it, which really feeds into the valuation. The other one is the regulators. So making sure that everybody agrees on the valuation method. And 3 is really. So a lot of the work that I do is on the corporate side. So I'm looking at what assets are corporate assets. A lot of these are the interplay now is with the consumer. And the problem with that is, and consumers are interesting in that they will not pay to download an app, but they will pay to buy an asset in a game, okay, like a digital outfit, whatever it is. And that business model, I think, gives life to these assets having any value at all. Because I think on the corporate side, it would be hard, especially with the regulations and the reporting challenges. So anyways, that's kind of where I see things, and I'm happy to talk more about it. But really where I see these assets come up, I see a lot of these SAFs, and I see a lot in the gaming industry.
Okay, terrific. Erich, tell us about IPwe and your use of blockchain and NFTs.
Yeah, so we started in 2018, so just post CryptoKitties, so those kind of NFTs are still relatively new. And what we started to look at was, in partnership with IBM, was how could we tokenize the intangibles on the balance sheet, and in particular started with patents. And so most of the companies we work with are large enterprise companies. So the last thing they want their NFT to do is to facilitate some type of trading because you can't get it through their regulatory groups. We're making progress in that regard. We can maybe talk about that a little bit. So far it's a short conversation. If you walk into a big company and tell them that you have a tradable NFT for them, they're just not interested. So what we worked on is we use NFTs more as data warehouses. And in particular, what we do is that we use them to store contextual information about patents. So simple non-contextual information is all the stuff that exists within the four corners of the patent. Contextual information is something that might inform on value, i.e. licensing history, pledge history, whatever that history of that asset is. So again, we primarily use them as information warehouses. We do it for both large university systems as well as enterprise companies, and slowly but surely expanding into other classes of intangibles as well. So regardless of what your view of is on NFT, I think that what you're seeing is the beginning of the enterprise adoption phase. So, give or take, blockchain's been around since 2010. It went through a period of, incredible hype, then went through the inevitable valley of disappointment, and started to come out of that about a year and a half, 2 years ago, where you start to see the first true enterprise use cases that then ultimately inform you and indicate to you that ultimately this is likely to spread. And become important. Just to follow up on a couple of comments, whether or not it continues to be important for Banksy's and pieces of movie scripts that Quentin Tarantino picks up or not sure. I think so. I think it's an interesting way to do it. Memorabilia applications, things like that. Ton of issues to address. I think I was talking to Talal about a week ago about the OpenSeas or Dapper Labs. One of the other commented that made a comment in passing that a very high percentage of the NFTs that float across their system, and those are the two biggest platforms in the system, have problems. Another person might describe them as improperly titled. So whenever you have an off-blockchain asset, that's a huge issue. That's something that Talal can talk about better than I can. But again, we're focused in on enterprise application, focused in on the intangibles piece of the balance sheet, and patents to start.
Okay, terrific. I just want to follow up on that history that you just recounted. In 2018, you or your company recognized the potential value of tokenization related to the transfers of patents. Was it something independent of the NFTs that were being used for like the CryptoPunks, CryptoKitties, or was it something that was a part of that sort of development that what you characterize as an enterprise use? Was the enterprise use independent of the sort of collectible use, or was it happening sort of in reaction or sort of inspired by that?
Yeah, look, it really was. I mean, this was literally months after CryptoKitties first, and you had to be, deep in the weeds in order to even know what that was in October of 2017. But yeah, the first applications, we saw that. We said, hey, this is kind of interesting. It's a little bit, it's as with many early technologies. I remember back to the early days of the internet in the early 90s. Some of the applications struck me as a bit odd at the time. The way we looked at it was, we said, hey, listen, what do we have to do to get enterprise comfortable with this, right? So a real simple problem. Whenever you have an off-blockchain asset, that could be biological fruit, that could be blood diamonds, it could be whatever you want it to be. It could be patents. And once you move that into an NFT, a simple thing about like title becomes a huge issue, right? There's not an issue about Bitcoin title. It originated off the blockchain. I can track that back all the way to its genesis, but these other things I can't. So there's certain things you need to do, and this will be where Web3 compliance will start to pop up to get enterprise comfortable to begin to deal with the technology. And that's how we approach the problem. Our mindset was, what will we have to do to get enterprise ultimately comfortable with this? And I'm not talking about some cool thing like, crypto kicks that Nike's doing or whatever Adidas is doing across their platform. Those are interesting, but not really, to my view, true enterprise use cases that impact the balance sheet. So again, our focus was, how do you get people who are, as a group, generally conservative, familiar with things like title insurance, but not familiar with things like NFTs. How do you get them comfortable that this is a safe thing to transact in? And that's how we approach the problem.
Okay, terrific. So our first question for the entire panel relates to potential uses of NFTs related to intellectual property. And I just wanted to maybe provide a little bit of unpacking of two examples that Erich mentioned that I think are fascinating. So the CryptoKitties, if people are not familiar with this fad that was 2017 following, it involved the use of NFTs for kitties that you could so-called mate together with another owner's CryptoKitty to produce offspring in another CryptoKitty and then keep on reproducing those CryptoKitties. And people were shelling out thousands of dollars to buy these CryptoKitties. And then eventually it sort of faded in popularity, perhaps in part because the supply increased dramatically. Once you keep on mating all those CryptoKitties, the value of the CryptoKitty will go down as you keep on increasing the supply. Nike came out and filed a patent on the CryptoKicks. That's what Erich referred to. The CryptoKicks involve a process of using NFTs to authenticate Nike sneakers, both physical sneakers and digital sneakers, and a particular design for those sneakers. And the owner of the NFT gets the right to mate the Nike NFT with the NFT of another owner from Nike, and then produce a remixed version, a second generation version of Nike designed shoes, and then entitle the owners of those two NFTs to physical sneakers from Nike. So that's sort of like a way in which Nike can, potentially decrease the amount of counterfeit sales of Nike sneakers, but also engage the consumer in a way that's sort of far different from today's sales of sneakers. So I wanted to open up just like the first question to the entire panel. Are there other ways to use NFTs related to IP or IP-protected content that you are looking forward to or that you find to be, a fascinating development?
I'm going to go back to, so my umbrella is the one I would like to have my comments under is that of digital assets, more than just NFTs. So a lot of what I'm hearing is consumer, consumer, consumer. I'm not hearing a lot of corporate and enterprise. And I think that might not give NFT. I believe actually in what Erich is doing, so I think there is potential for the corporation. I think that some of these stories about kitties and things like that are not giving NFT the right, are not coming across as something that a corporate asset would look like. I also would like to mention that where a lot of the economy is around in this digital asset world is in the developer. So there are huge developer communities. And that's how a lot of companies are actually making money off of things on the blockchain is through services to developers. And my son works for a company called Unity. They're big players in the digital world. And they mostly make, there's a lot of developer SaaS. There's other companies like that. So I would just like to, between the corporate and the consumer, there's also the developers, and it's been a huge market for a lot of companies. So I just want to mention that. So my mind is always going to business models and monetization for the corporation. So that's kind of how I think about things.
I think it's important to separate and I saw this with peer-to-peer file sharing. It's important to separate the technology from the sociological and economic behavior around these things, and because people get all twisted around the axle. What happened with peer-to-peer file sharing, BitTorrent, right? People use the BitTorrent protocol for stealing movies and songs that still do. Bram Cohen, when he wrote BitTorrent, open sourced the actual protocol. The biggest users of BitTorrent on the planet today are actually Facebook and Netflix. They use it to push legally owned copies of their software out. It's the most efficient way to transmit large files over the internet. NFTs, blockchains, all that stuff are just computational tools to handle, just a situation where you have an extremely large number of things that need to be tracked and traded, that go through life cycles, increase value, lose value, get exchanged. Separating those two things, and then going back to something Efrat just said, which is it's not just about copyrightable materials, it's not just about patents, but it's about physical objects that have digital twins or digital pointers. I think what you're going to see over the next 5 or 10 years is the rollout of a new layer of technology. It's really what Web3 is about. It's a rollout of a new set of highly distributed computing technologies that are secure and trusted, where you can have pointers to physical objects and digital objects, wherever they are on the planet, that have attributes that indicate this is the legal ownership, these are the rights the person has, and they will be implemented through a variety of different technologies. I think blockchains will play a major role in it. There'll be another layer of this, which is the money layer, which is, when you buy something, it gets value, it gains value, it moves on to the next person. I'm going to buy something off you, whether it's a pair of shoes or whether it's a picture of a monkey. That thing, I'm going to have to pay you for it. Mm-hmm. And that value needs to be, and it so happens that blockchain technologies are really amenable for exchanging actual value, and it doesn't have to be cash. It can be, any kind of value exchange, credit, what have you. You're going to be a very busy person for a long time, just because there's all sorts of incredibly sophisticated issues in terms of how you value and validate and authenticate the actual financial aspects of these transactions, as well as the chain of handling, custody, ownership, et cetera. One question I had for Erich, actually, if I could ask a question to another panelist, is it doesn't seem to be like maybe I'm wrong, but the patent asset of any given enterprise, there just aren't that many patents in any given company to justify the cost of using a blockchain technology. Why did you guys make the leap to implementing a blockchain? What's the high number of atoms that you're trying to manage with these types of technologies?
Yeah, and so I think you're starting out from, so the cost is insignificant. The cost to NFT is nominal. If again, they can get high on Ethereum. We don't happen to be fans of Ethereum and don't think it will ever be broadly adopted by enterprise because of the variable cost nature of it. But if you operate on something like a network that does a better job of electricity consumption and cost, something like Casper, you can keep that cost down extremely low, and it is the record of truth, right? That's what the enterprise companies are getting comfortable with, is that that didn't exist before, and take something as simple as title on a patent, right? It's a complicated issue. I don't know how many patents I've bought, but probably somewhere around 20,000. And I think every agreement that I ever was a part of, where I was a buyer, the seller would say to the knowledge they have title, and so just ridiculous risk allocation, things like that you're able to alleviate if you go through the right process. So I think that don't think of it as you only use blockchain in high volume transaction cases. You can actually use them where basic truths and basic information are critical, and how you access them is critical. And I think that's what appeals to enterprise in this particular case.
Great. Okay, great. We'll go to the audience. Any questions for the panel? Back there.
I have a question about NFTs and blockchain and enforcement as it compares to U.S. IP and patent law and so on. Can NFTs and blockchain be used to enforce, I guess, your rights, as opposed to U.S. patent law and trademark law is backed by the federal government. As a property right that's created by the government, therefore you can sue in federal court. How do you enforce on the blockchain, or can you, in a similar way for intellectual property? I don't know if I made sense with my question.
No, it makes a lot of sense. And that is one of the challenges of decentralization, or the idea that NFTs are a part of Web3 in a more decentralized approach. In terms of outright theft of NFTs, yes, there is enforcement against that using criminal laws and also outright fraud. The United States government just recently filed a lawsuit against two developers of NFTs for a project that was a so-called rug pull, where they promised a lot of perks, and then as soon as they got all the money and sold the NFTs, they shut down the business. And that was, the charge is wire fraud and conspiracy to commit wire fraud against those two developers. Go ahead, sorry.
Can the blockchain replace the patent system or replace the trademark system? That's not the question. Can it be used?
I mean, just think of a blockchain as the world's biggest filing cabinet full of contracts, and you're not going to replace the patent system. You're not going to replace courts. All you're going to do is yank the proof of ownership and the license off a blockchain, the same way you'd pull it out of a paper filing cabinet and go to court. An interesting variation. Last time I got called up to jury duty, I was going to kill myself. And I was listening to a drunk driver beat up a cop. And all I could think of was you could replace this entire process with a computer. I mean, you didn't need a jury, you didn't need a judge. I realize I'm being somewhat silly here, but an interesting question would be, could you have an assertion proof of concept system for intellectual property that's completely automated? If all the truth, as Erich was saying, was like encoded on a blockchain, and all the value was being exchanged and audited and escrowed in different places, I show up and I say, you stole my sneakers. Theoretically, with this blockchain thingamajig, you should be able to push a button and guilty, give him back his sneakers. And that's theoretically possible, but that's going to require changing the Constitution, at least in this country.
One thing I'll just add in terms of copyright, I have an article out. I can send you a link to it. You can modify the arrangement of copyright. So the clearest example of this is with resale royalty rights for NFTs, which are automated through the smart contract. So the producer of the NFT will automatically get, let's say, 3% of every resale of the NFT. The United States has long rejected resale royalty rights for copyright, and that's something that France and other countries, 80 other countries, recognize. So that's one example in which sort of can you enforce something and that modifies the current way of our copyright system operates. Yes, I think we're already seeing that happen with the use of NFTs.
But how do you enforce it?
It's automatic. It's a part of the smart contract.
What if someone hacks it or violates the contract? Don't you end up in court?
You could. I mean, but yeah, I mean, blockchain is not 100% hack proof, but it's hard to hack. Yeah. But anyway, I think individual artists love this because of the resale royalty rights that give them a chance to make a living as an independent artist, more so than they could under the previous approach.
I think the point you're making is the number of new businesses around intellectual property is going to blossom. And it's going to be easier to implement stuff, and the probability of ending up in court is going to be far lower because people are going to be happy.
Okay, with that, I think we are out of time because I see Bruce walking over here. So why don't we thank the entire panel for this fascinating discussion.